Imagine finding a campsite where dinner is still laid out, boots and coats untouched, and a tent ripped from the inside, as if its occupants had fled into a Siberian blizzard half-dressed. If you enjoy vivid mysteries and deep visuals, like and subscribe. It helps us bring these stories to life. 10 hikers set out for the Ural Mountains. 1 turned back. The remaining 9 never returned. Their tent stood high on Kholat Syakhl. 9 skilled hikers walked in. Something forced them out that night. What makes this mystery endure is not just what happened, but why. And the first clues only deepen the contradiction. Imagine cutting yourself out of your only shelter and stepping into the night with no coat, no boots, not even mittens. The air was brutally cold, far below freezing. The snow was deep. Miles from safety, you would have known what that meant. Yet 9 experienced hikers, trained and supplied for winter survival, left everything behind and walked straight into exposure. Inside their tent, rescuers later found half-prepared food and gear untouched. Plates with meals ready for eating sat in silence, as though the group had expected nothing more than a calm evening. No sign of a fight, no sign of intruders. Yet outside, the snow held footprints pressed in overlapping lines, some in boots, some in socks, some bare feet. That quiet interior beside the evidence of sudden flight feels less like a camp and more like an unread book with pages torn out at random. At the heart of this riddle was one stark finding. Investigators noted the tent had been cut open from the inside, a detail confirmed in case files by the observation of a seamstress. If the entrance flap was free, what compelled someone to carve their way out instead? The tracks led about a mile toward the tree line. There, near a crude fire, searchers found the first bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. They were in their underwear. Krivonishenko had burn marks on his skin and, according to reports, a piece of flesh in his mouth, bitten from his own hand. Taken together, those signs point to desperate attempts to keep warm in brutal conditions. The fire may have bought minutes of life, but nothing more. Beyond that fire pit, matters grew even stranger. Several hikers were discovered with internal injuries that baffled investigators. Some had fractured ribs and skulls, yet their skin showed no external wounds. One woman was missing her tongue, another had no eyes. These findings were recorded in the original case materials, and they did not align with a single simple cause. An avalanche might crush, but it would leave different marks. A fall might explain fractures, but it should leave bruising. A fight would leave cuts and abrasions. Instead, the damage existed inside bodies that remained outwardly mostly intact. Investigators at the time pointed out that the injuries seemed inconsistent, and no one explanation fit neatly with all of them. This clash of details sharpens the puzzle. You have a tent left orderly, food laid out, and gear untouched. You have prints in the snow, some barefoot, heading into sub-zero darkness. You have 2 men burned and half naked by a fire. Others fatally injured in ways that defy a clean cause. How can all these pieces coexist? Decades later, new claims continue to stir debate. Researcher Teodora Hajiska reports finding a condensed milk tin dated 1958 at the site. She says this challenges earlier assumptions that the hikers had no supplies outside the tent. She also reports a cedar tree she dated through dendrology as having fallen in early 1959, placing it contemporaneous with the incident. These claims may reshape timelines, or they may complicate the picture further. Importantly, they remain subject to verification, and not all researchers agree. When you step back, the scene refuses to arrange itself into a single story. Each fragment, the cut tent, the footprints, the burns, the missing organs, the contested artifacts, points in a direction that cancels out another. What makes this so striking is how the evidence itself seems to argue with itself, leaving you not with one story, but with many. And as each new claim or finding joins the record, the puzzle deepens rather than clears. The question becomes less about what happened in one night on that mountain, and more about how so many irreconcilable details have survived together in one case file. That tension is what keeps this story alive. It draws you back not with the promise of one neat answer, but with the stubborn refusal of the clues to agree on any. And that unresolved clash, to this day, is what turns Dyatlov Pass from a single tragedy into an enduring enigma. What keeps Dyatlov Pass alive in memory is not a shortage of theories, but the clash between them. Each detail cancels out another, leaving what History.com called a contentious and unsolved mystery. Recent, researcher-led finds, like the alleged 1958 tin and a dated fallen cedar, complicate the picture, but they do not yet resolve it. So the central question remains: how can these details coexist? Share your take in the comments. What explanation fits best, or which contradiction puzzles you most? In 1977, a single signal from deep space lit up a telescope and stunned astronomers. It lasted just 72 seconds, and then it was gone. No repeat, no explanation, only a handwritten word in the margin. Wow. If you enjoy vivid mysteries and deep visuals, like and subscribe. It helps us bring these stories to life. But here's the question. What if that famous signal wasn't an alien beacon at all, but the trace of something far more ordinary and still extraordinary, hidden in nature itself? Decades later, new research has reopened the case, combing through old radio data and finding clues that point in a different direction. To understand why, we need to start with what the astronomer actually saw on that sheet of paper. Imagine scanning the sky for years and seeing nothing but faint, uneventful noise. Then, one evening, a string of symbols jumps out so clearly that your first response isn't to calculate. It's to circle it and scribble a stunned word in the margin. Wow. That was exactly what confronted Jerry Ammon in the summer of 1977. He was looking over data from the Big Ear radio telescope, a massive fixed installation in Ohio tuned to sweep across thin slices of the heavens. Big Ear didn't produce recordings of sound. Instead, it printed out long chains of letters and numbers, each encoding a signal strength. For Ammon, these otherwise dull rows of output were familiar. That day, one sequence broke the pattern. It simply read 6EQUJ5. To someone untrained, meaningless. To an astronomer, it stood out like graffiti on a blank wall. Ordinary background values were usually small. When letters appeared, they showed stronger responses. Here, in the middle, was a cluster of letters that signified an unusually sharp, powerful spike, far beyond the hum of static that normally filled the page. What Ammon saw was not random chatter. It was a very strong, narrowband signal that towered above the background. The frequency where it appeared made the moment even more unsettling. The signal sat close to what's known as the hydrogen line, a wavelength linked to the universe's most abundant element. Astronomers had long speculated that if any civilization wanted to be noticed, this would be the obvious place to transmit. To see a clean signal right there, and only there, made the odd printout glow with possibility. Yet what made it remarkable was not only where it appeared, but how it behaved. The signal held steady for about 72 seconds. The exact span Big Ear could track one point in the sky before Earth's rotation moved it out of view. Because the telescope was fixed, celestial sources drifted through its field of listening, producing a window of observation. In this case, The window opened. The spike appeared strong and narrow. Then it slipped away as the planet continued to turn. The event never repeated. Countless returns to the same region turned up nothing. It was there once and then gone. To Eamon, jotting "wow" in the margin wasn't a claim of contact. It was more like an admission that he had seen something outside the usual order. An unread book suddenly visible beneath the dust of a library where the shelves were thought empty. For decades, this short burst stood as both clue and puzzle. Some regarded it as a whisper from another mind. Others insisted it was an earthly artifact or an unknown natural source. But the mystery did not end on that page. In recent years, new data reopened the file. Researchers in the Arecibo WOW project reanalyzed archived Arecibo observations and, in 2020, found weaker, similar bursts aligned with cold hydrogen clouds. These fainter events echoed the same narrowband shape as the 1977 detection, but at levels more modest and scattered. The team suggests a possible mechanism. A powerful outburst from a magnetar or a soft gamma repeater could energize neutral hydrogen within a cloud, causing it to flare at that line. In effect, a maser-like brightening could mimic the kind of spike once captured by Big Ear, right where the WOW sequence appeared. This proposal remains under debate. The work is posted on arXiv and not yet peer-reviewed. Some astronomers have noted that the physical requirements are extremely delicate and, so far, not demonstrated. A leading SETI researcher described the conditions as unproven. Still, the idea provides a natural explanation to test, and that shifts the WOW mystery into the realm of repeatable science. To widen the search, the same group launched WOW at Home, a citizen science program showing that even modest radio setups might catch similar bursts of hydrogen brightening. For you as a listener, it means the story isn't only confined to large observatories. Small instruments can play a part in watching the skies, whether caused by instruments, natural bursts, or something we haven't even named. That single string of symbols still echoes, and the deeper importance may not be whether it was a greeting from far away at all. What matters is how it continues to push science toward sharper methods, and how fleeting mysteries become questions we can test. The story of the WOW signal leads us to a deeper truth. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries are not answers, but the new ways of asking questions they leave behind. The WOW signal may never have been a deliberate greeting from beyond. Recent research suggests it could have been a natural flare from hydrogen clouds energized by rare cosmic events. Yet, that remains a hypothesis, published as a preprint, not a settled fact. What it produced was testable ideas, archived data hunts, new searches, and even citizen science tools like WOW at Home, all aimed at finding more events. A single anomaly pushed astronomers to sharpen methods and rethink how signals are judged. What counts as a message and what is a natural signal acting like language remains an open question. A single word carved into a post, Croatoan, has haunted historians for centuries. If you enjoy vivid mysteries and deep visuals, like and subscribe. This helps us bring these stories to life. In 1587, about 115 men, women, and children settled Roanoke Island. Their governor, John White, left for supplies and did not return for 3 years. When he finally arrived in 1590, he found the settlement abandoned. The word Croatoan had been carved into a palisade post and the letters CRO etched into a tree. No other trace of the colonists remained. The items recovered since then, gun parts, a slate tablet, even a gold ring, seem like voices from the past, but they cannot yet speak plainly. What they leave us with is a mystery that still lingers in fragments. When John White returned to Roanoke in 1590, he expected to find the colony he had left only 3 years earlier. Instead, there were no colonists, no homes, and no fields under cultivation. The settlement stood silent. The only sign was a single carved word, Croatoan, etched into a post, and the letters CRO cut into a nearby tree. It was not a declaration, but a puzzle, a message that raised more questions than it answered. Relief that no bodies were found mixed with dread at the deeper unknown. Where had they gone? From that haunting clue, we move not to written testimony, but to what survives in the ground. Centuries later, archaeologists began searching for the next traces of these vanished settlers, and 2 sites emerged as central. On Hatteras Island at Cape Creek, a team led by Mark Horton of the University of Bristol has unearthed a dense mix of native and European objects. Separately, near the Albemarle Sound in what is known as Site X, the First Colony Foundation, under archaeologist Nick Lucchetti, has recovered shards of pottery and metal fragments that bear striking connections to Roanoke. Together, these digs form the backbone of the evidence that still fuels the debate. At Cape Creek, the discoveries suggest an entanglement of 2 worlds. European materials appear in the same layers as Croatoan artifacts. Among the most notable finds are a corroded rapier hilt in Elizabethan style, the worn fragment of a slate tablet faintly scratched with the letter M, and a small copper eyelet, likely from English clothing. Perhaps most captivating is a gold signet ring, engraved with what seems to be a prancing lion or horse, found in 1998. At first glance, it appeared to tie directly to a lost colonist, but it was recovered in soil mixed with later debris from the mid-1600s, leaving open the possibility it arrived through trade decades after the colony had vanished. There are other small but evocative items. A copper bun, or ingot, points to European metalwork not produced by indigenous communities. Bones of deer and turtles sit beside hunks of brick and iron fragments, suggesting a layered site of meals, building, and exchange. Each piece hints at settlement, but can also be read as trade object. Archaeologists often compare the scene to studying a charred spine of a book, stripped of its pages. You can hold the frame, but the full story is missing. Meanwhile, the First Colony Foundation at Site X has turned up evidence that colonists may have shifted inland. Here, the finds include borderware pottery, an English type known from Roanoke and later Jamestown, as well as a metal hook and a small copper aglet. Crucially, these layers lack the pottery forms typical of later Virginia settlers who moved into the region after 1650. Linking this site to the lost colonists is speculative, but the material suggests a stronger tie than chance alone. Helping to connect the dots is a clue from the era itself. John White's 1585 La Virginia Pars map, preserved in London, was long assumed to be a straightforward coastal chart. Yet in recent decades, researchers noticed a patch covering part of the inland area. Beneath it lay a faint 4-pointed star symbol. Some now interpret this as a marker of a planned fort or refuge further inland. That hidden annotation provided the spark to investigate Site X in the first place, showing how a small cartographic decision centuries ago continues to shape archaeological direction today. With finds like these, it can be easy to weave a tidy story of survival. Colonists abandoning the coast, colonists absorbed into native families. But evidence makes such neat closure risky. Many European items at both Cape Creek and Site X come from mixed stratigraphic layers, levels of soil that also contain materials dating to the mid-17th century. As experts note, Radiocarbon and pottery dating cannot cleanly separate 1590 from 1630. A ring or shard can move down through the earth or be kept in use by multiple generations. The line between colonist possession and native reuse is often too thin to see clearly. Archaeologists themselves urge measured caution. Ivor Noel Hume, a respected voice in early colonial studies, once remarked to colleagues that in these cases, you have more work to do. Others, like Brett Riggs of the University of North Carolina, warn against assuming European objects prove European presence. Indigenous groups were adept at scavenging and reusing foreign goods. To them, a copper tool or an iron shard was useful material, regardless of whether colonists remained nearby. So the fragments whisper at possibilities, but resist firm conclusions. The tilt of the record suggests adaptation, assimilation, or relocation, more than violent collapse. Yet the gaps are wide, and each artifact carries the weight of interpretation as much as discovery. Taken together, these finds tilt toward survival and assimilation as plausible. But the mixed contexts and dating limits mean they cannot yet be treated as proof. And it is in that space, where evidence leads us forward but never quite closes the case, that the story continues to live. What you are left to weigh is a set of traces that never quite align. On one side are the carved word Croatoan, the slate tablet with its faint mark, the gold ring, and the rapier hilt. On the other are the problems of mixed soil layers, uncertain dating, and artifacts that might have passed through native hands long after the colony was gone. Independent archaeologists remind us of the balance. These finds are striking and full of promise, but not strong enough yet to close the case. Now the question comes to you. Do these fragments point to survival, assimilation, or something else? Leave your theory below. Some mysteries wait not because answers are gone, but because they're still buried, waiting for the right voice to read them. What if one of North America's most persistent treasure hunts has been nothing more than a geological trick? For more than 2 centuries, Oak Island's money pit has drawn explorers with tales of hidden vaults and pirate gold. If you enjoy vivid mysteries and deep visuals, like and subscribe. It helps us bring these stories to life. Many attempts to reach the supposed treasure have been stopped by sudden flooding. Some see an elaborate man-made trap. Others argue it's natural geology at work. A survey by Woods Hole in 1995 even suggested the seawater could be explained by tidal pressure against the island's freshwater lens. So here's the question. Are those fibers and symbols evidence of design, or just noise that fed a legend? You'll see both sides before you decide. And it begins with something odd found along the island's rocky shore. When people point to evidence on Oak Island, 4 items always surface first. The layers of coconut fiber, the so-called cipher stone, a fragment of parchment, and the dramatic stories of red paint flooding tests. Each one has been presented as a critical piece of the puzzle. Each one, though, carries its own set of problems. Let's weigh them one by one, alongside the scientific explanations that challenge their treasure-related interpretations. The coconut fibers may be the most familiar. They were first reported in the 1800s, found deep in the money pit, and again near the shore. For early diggers, this material felt significant. After all, coconuts do not grow in the cold Atlantic. The fibers became proof that people from far away had deliberately packed or lined the pit. Later accounts even say that samples were sent to the Smithsonian in the early 20th century, where they were identified as genuine coconut fiber. News like that electrified 19th century investors, making them believe they had stumbled on evidence of long-distance voyagers. Yet alternatives exist. Ships often carried coconut fiber for trade or as packing material, meaning it could have arrived through commerce rather than construction. It may not point to treasure at all, only to human movement and exchange. Next comes the cipher stone. The story goes that at about 90 feet down, a slate-like stone was lifted out, said to bear a line of mysterious characters. Treasure writers quickly imagined it was a coded warning. However, later witnesses saw no inscription at all. Captain H.L. Baudouin examined a stone in 1909 and described it as a smooth block of fine basalt without markings. Basalt is durable. The idea that shallow engravings had once been carved and then worn away strains credibility. The contradiction leaves us with two possibilities. Either the original reports exaggerated the stone's features, or the object shown to later visitors was not the same one. Either way, that one stone shows how quickly an artifact can slide from evidence into uncertain lore. The parchment fragment amplifies this pattern. In 1896 or 1898, diggers using boring tools recovered a tiny sliver of sheepskin-like material embedded in clay. On its surface, according to reports, were faint letters, perhaps VI or WI. For those explorers, it was electrifying. Written text could only mean documents were hidden below. But here too, problems multiply. Specialists remind us that parchment fragments can slip into soil layers through contamination, especially during messy excavations. Without secure context, the scrap could have come from unrelated sources in modern times. Its potential as a clue is striking, but its reliability rests on unsteady ground. Then there is the famous red paint test. In 1898, searchers poured colored liquid into the flooded pit, claiming it surfaced through channels on different parts of the island. That seemed to demonstrate an elaborate flood tunnel network designed to keep intruders out. For treasure hunters, it was a dazzling indication of hidden engineering. Yet no modern independent evidence supports those claims. In 1995, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution ran dye tests of their own. Their findings pointed to a natural system, ocean tides pressing against Oak Island's freshwater lens, forcing water into the pit. In other words, what looked like a clever siphon might simply be the island's geology at work. This geological context matters. Scientists point out that Oak Island sits on glacially formed ground, with layers of anhydrite and limestone underneath. Such rocks can dissolve, creating voids and unpredictable water flow. Add tidal pressure, and flooding becomes inevitable, with no need for hidden tunnels cut by secret engineers. Consider the clues like tiles in a wet mosaic. Place the coconut fibers, the cipher stone, the parchment, and the paint test side by side, and they form the shape of a grand design. Remove just one, say the engraving that others never saw, and the picture dissolves into scattered debris. That fragility is the paradox of Oak Island. Each fragment teases, but none confirm. Treasure hunters through the centuries have clung to these objects, lifting them like relics. For them, the possibility of design outweighed every uncertainty. For you, watching the record unfold, the deeper question emerges. What do these fragments truly represent? Evidence of hidden craft or stories created in the gaps left by nature? And that brings us to the real center of the mystery. Not just the fibers or stones, but the tension between artifacts that seem intentional and the science that points to natural forces. It's this standoff between belief in design and trust in geology that keeps Oak Island alive in the imagination. What endures about Oak Island is the pattern itself. Fragments that spark huge theories, but retreat under closer study. Despite all the artifacts and more than 2 centuries of digging, no central treasure site has ever been confirmed. This is the paradoxical evidence framework in action. Small, striking finds invite big stories. Then scientific tests and alternate histories pull us back toward doubt. Perhaps the lasting treasure is the story, a puzzle that survives because it never resolves. Which explanation feels more convincing to you? Human design or natural geology? Tell us in the comments. Imagine opening your morning newspaper. Instead of headlines, a message waits, written not to inform, but to taunt. A killer is out there, addressing you and the police, daring anyone who reads it to break his code. If you enjoy vivid mysteries and deep visuals, like and subscribe. It helps us bring these stories to life. He called himself the Zodiac, and he turned his letters into puzzles unlike anything the public had seen. One cipher of 408 symbols was solved in 1969 within days. Another, 340 symbols long, resisted until 2020. Neither revealed his name, only darker promises that fed his myth. This video traces those two puzzles, their decryptions, the disturbing messages inside, and how solving them only deepened the mystery. Today you can try the ciphers yourself. Check the pinned link for high-res images. And it all begins with the first challenge he placed in plain sight. In August 1969, 3 Bay Area newspapers each received a near-identical letter. Inside was not only a ranting message, but also 1/3 of a 408-symbol cryptogram. The killer demanded that the papers print these symbols for all to see, warning that more violence would follow if they refused. For the police, the problem was immediate. They weren't only chasing a murderer, they were trying to contain the fear that his code might remain forever sealed. If the text stayed unread, the killer's control would spread unchecked. Panic alone could become his weapon. Yet the solution didn't come from law enforcement or intelligence agencies. It came from a Salinas couple, Donald and Betty Hardin. After examining the published cipher for days, they noticed repeating clusters of symbols and guessed at common phrases. Piece by piece, the whole 408-character message unlocked under their eyes. Look at the cipher yourself. Spot the repeats. See how the patterns line up. That was the same path the Hardins followed. And if you want to study it closer, the pinned link below has high-resolution images. What they uncovered was chilling. The text opened with the plain admission that killing people was so much fun. It spoke of murder, bringing pleasure, of power gained through death, and of victims serving him in an afterlife he spelled as paradise. There was no name, no address, no lid to chase down, just words designed to unsettle, like an unread book buried beneath a city, visible yet withholding its truth. What that could mean is that the killer never intended for these puzzles to give him away. His real intent was to use language as a weapon, each phrase acting like a trap that stayed alive long after the actual crimes. And the first cipher, cracked within days, was only the beginning, because the next one held fast for decades. The most infamous of the Zodiac's puzzles was the so-called 340 cipher. It was mailed on November 8, 1969. A single sheet crammed with 340 symbols that looked like broken shapes and marks scattered into rows. From the beginning, it stood apart. The 408th had slipped open in days. This one resisted. Law enforcement pored over it. Military code experts tried. Professional cryptographers, teachers, hobbyists, engineers, thousands mapped every angle. Some searched for mirrored patterns, others for a hidden roster of names. Line after line collapsed into nothing. Even the most confident attempts dissolved like smoke. and the cipher's reputation only grew. For 51 years, it gave up nothing. Then, on December 5th, 2020, the deadlock broke. Not by chance, but through the work of 3 private citizens. David Oranchak, a software engineer from Virginia, joined forces with Australian mathematician Sam Blake and Belgian programmer Jarl van Eyck. With modern tools and carefully planned methods, they fit the symbols into place. Word by word, the puzzle unlocked. But what came out was not the revelation many expected. The text began with a boast about having lots of fun and carried the same disturbing tone as the earlier cipher. It went further, taunting investigators by denying any link to Sam, a caller who claimed to be the Zodiac on a talk show in 1969. The FBI confirmed the breakthrough, but admitted the message held no leads to the killer's identity. No name, no address, nothing that moved the case forward. When the message was finally read in 2020, did it give detectives the missing piece? The short answer, no. What it offered instead was proof that the killer's intent was never truth, it was control. And that is why the real story may not lie in the unsolved crimes themselves, but in how his puzzles forced the public into his game. The Zodiac ciphers show a sharp divide between what was solved and what still lingers. The 408th fell in 1969, the 340th in 2020. Yet the killer's identity remains unproven, and the case is still officially unsolved. Authorities once named Arthur Lee Allen as a suspect, but he was never charged. These puzzles turned a private violence into a public game, and you, watching now, are part of the long attempt to answer it. What remains unexplained is whether the codes were meant to reveal the man behind them, or to ensure he never had to. And tell us in the comments, if you had the 340 cipher in front of you, where would you begin? Only 2 out of every 100 people can hear it. A formal survey in the early 1990s found that about 161 of Taos's 8,000 residents reported a persistent hum. If you love immersive mysteries, like and subscribe. It helps us bring these stories to life. For those few, it is a constant low vibration, part rumble, part tone. For everyone else, it is nothing at all. That gap has turned Taos into one of modern history's most puzzling case studies. Why does human perception divide so sharply within the same landscape? Even advanced tests by Los Alamos and Sandia National Laboratories, the Air Force Phillips Lab, and the University of New Mexico failed to locate a source. Their conclusion was stark. We are left with a mystery. And this mystery begins, quite literally, with the sound, or silence, that defines life in Taos. Imagine standing in the quiet of the New Mexican desert. The horizon holds stillness, the wind brushes past, and then, without warning, a slow vibration creeps into your awareness. It isn't sharp or piercing, but low, steady, and heavy, as though it lives just beneath the soil. Most people nearby insist the world is silent. Yet a very small number, about 2% of Taos residents, according to surveys, say the sound never stops. That proportion is tiny, but what makes it striking is the contrast. For the majority, there is truly nothing to hear. To you, though, if you were among the hearers, the hum would sound like a constant background presence you couldn't escape. Some describe it as a muted bass note that follows them from room to room, especially at night. Imagine if this filled your nights, but everyone around you insisted on silence. How would that feel? This difference has created tension inside the town. For some households, one partner complains of sleepless nights, while the other insists the home lies in perfect stillness. Neighbors quietly debate whether the sound is real or imagined. A few even dismiss it as nerves or ear trouble. Others, tormented by what they hear, frame it as an invasion no one else acknowledges. In this sense, it isn't only a sound. It becomes a test of trust. The story leapt beyond personal frustration in 1992, sparked by a single letter to the local paper. Katanya Saltzman wrote to the Taos News asking who else had heard a strange, low vibration. Dozens of residents responded, and together their voices drew national attention. That small push set formal study into motion. Scientists could no longer treat the hum as rumor. When investigators arrived, they carried specialized equipment and broad methods. They monitored acoustic, seismic, and electromagnetic signals for weeks. The effort became so fine-tuned that their geophones once captured the faint scraping of a gopher tunneling underground. If they could pick up a gopher, surely they could detect a hum shaking the lives of people. Yet, no clear source was found. The study eventually closed with 6 words etched firmly into mystery. We are left with a mystery. For those who claim to hear it, descriptions did overlap. Most place the pitch at about 32 to 80 hertz, so low it sits at the very edge of human hearing. One analogy surfaces again and again, like a distant diesel engine idling endlessly on the horizon. Others compare it to the weight of a single organ tone that never resolves. Whether throbbing, humming, or pressing like hidden energy lines, each variation fed the same unsettled truth. It was always there for the few who could perceive it. The effects also varied. Many reported headaches, sudden fatigue, or the torment of sleepless nights. Stress mounted in homes where one family member swore the sound was present and others insisted nothing was wrong. Yet for some, the hum gave off a strange calm. They likened it to the resonance of a meditation bowl, something steady and grounding rather than disruptive. That range of responses only deepened the puzzle. Why did the same sound disturb one hearer and soothe another? We're not just talking about Taos. Tales of similar drones come from elsewhere. In Bristol, England, throughout the 1970s, hundreds of residents petitioned about a mysterious low hum that plagued their nights. More recently, in Windsor, Ontario, residents battled a persistent vibration suspected to come from industrial operations on Zug Island. Even in Kokomo, Indiana, reports sparked such public distress that researchers eventually traced parts of the sound to factory equipment. Yet some residents swore the hum continued long after. These echoes abroad suggest that Taos might be part of a wider, hidden pattern. So what remains is not only about a sound we cannot agree on, but about the people living with completely different experiences in the same place. The dividing line isn't mapped in geography, but in perception, between those who hear and those who don't. And that very divide raises the most unsettling question of all. When the world around us feels different to each of us, what does that mean for the reality we share? What stands out in Taos is that the mystery doesn't rest only in the sound, but in how differently people experience the same silence. Some hear nothing at all. Others describe a low drone they cannot escape. Whether it comes from industrial machinery, inner ear effects, or subtle atmospheric shifts, no single explanation has ever been confirmed. For you, the takeaway is simple. Silence isn't always the same for everyone. The official investigators themselves left us with one final line. We are left with a mystery. If you lived in Taos, do you think you'd hear it? On a quiet farm in Bavaria, 6 people were slaughtered with a single tool. But the most chilling part isn't the murder, it's what came after. For several days, evidence suggests roughly 3. The killer lived among the dead, Meals were cooked, livestock were fed, and the farmhouse carried on as if its true owners had never been silenced. This happened at Hinterkaifeck, a small Bavarian farmstead. The murders took place on the evening of March 31st, 1922. Days later, the bodies were discovered. But by then, someone had already erased time itself, tearing that very date from the farmhouse calendar. If you enjoy vivid mysteries and deep visuals, like and subscribe. It helps us bring these stories to life. The question is not only who could do this, but how the trap was first set. Why did each family member walk into the barn, one by one, never to return? On that night, the barn stood waiting, silent, unlit, and open. This is where the first footsteps went in and never came back out. The sequence of the killings, as later pieced together, suggests a pattern too deliberate to be chance. Each family member was drawn separately into the barn, where a heavy tool struck them down before they could raise alarm. There were no cries heard in the night, no interruptions long enough to halt what was happening just a few yards from the farmhouse. 4 bodies, Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, their daughter Victoria, and the young Cecilia, would later be found piled together, partially hidden under hay and a wooden door. Unsettling signs had already been noticed in the days before. Andreas himself reported tracks in the snow that came from the forest, but never returned. Keys to the house had gone missing, and sounds from the attic unnerved the family. These details paint a picture not of sudden ambush, but of a presence lying in wait, gathering knowledge about the household routines. Whoever swung the weapon worked with precision. The blows were delivered by a farm mattock, a tool like a pickaxe, used again and again. Evidence points to multiple skull fractures. 8 wounds on the elder Cecilia's head, 9 on Victoria's. The younger Cecilia not only suffered blunt trauma, but appears to have lived for hours after her injuries, in such agony that she tore out clumps of her own hair. There was no panic spreading through the house, no mad sprint to escape, only a grim spiral, one family member after another, swallowed by the barn's darkness. The weapon itself carries its own strange footnote. In the initial investigation, it was not recovered at the scene. Years later, when the farmstead was finally demolished, a blood-stained mattock was discovered hidden in the attic, a chilling reminder left embedded in the house as if it belonged there. The barn turned from a place of labor into a place of entrapment. The still air muffled movement, the heavy beams above absorbed sound. What makes this mysterious is the patience displayed. The victims came willingly, perhaps out of duty or curiosity, searching for the person who had just vanished moments before them. The murderer relied on routine and familiarity, knowing they would follow their instincts directly into danger. And when the barn was silent, the violence did not stop. Inside the farmhouse itself, 2-year-old Joseph was killed in his cot, and Maria Baumgartner, the maid who had arrived only that same day, was murdered in her room. 4 faces in the barn, 2 more in the house, a farm tool wielded without hesitation, and then silence. Yet silence was not truly what followed. Anyone approaching the farm in the days after would have seen smoke curling from the chimney. Animals were fed. Meals were prepared. The page for March 31st was torn from the calendar, freezing time in a grim gesture. These traces reveal that someone remained there, living in the house while 6 bodies lay close by. At the heart of this chapter is not just the brute act of slaughter, but the choice to stay behind afterward. That decision bends the crime into something even more disturbing. The barn killings ended in a single night, but what lingers is the eerie continuation of daily life in their aftermath. The The killings took place on the evening of 31st March, 1922, but the bodies were not discovered until 4th April. In that gap, investigators concluded someone occupied the farm, feeding animals, cooking meals, tending fires, and moving freely among the dead. The most chilling part is not how they died, but that someone lived beside them afterward. The case remained unsolved, in part because the early investigation was undermined. Neighbors and curious visitors entered the site, handled the bodies, and even cooked meals inside, contaminating evidence. Forensic practice in 1922 was limited. Fingerprints were rarely collected, leaving police with little to build from. The official file was closed in 1955, and the last recorded questioning took place in 1986. A review in 2007 noted the investigation's thoroughness, but also its shortcomings. Later teams even named likely suspects privately, but withheld those names out of respect for surviving families. Which of the known suspects seems most likely to you? Picture this. A linguist discovers a cryptic book, joins an expedition beneath the ocean, and uncovers a civilization that never truly died. That is Disney's Atlantis, The Lost Empire 2001, where Milo Thatch follows the shepherd's journal into a world thought forever lost. If you enjoy vivid mysteries and strong visuals, like and subscribe. It helps us bring these stories to life. Plato described Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules, advanced yet undone by its own pride. The film does something similar, shaping myth into a world that feels uncannily researched. What remains mysterious is how its invented details, symbols, language, entire blueprints, echo traditions and theories debated by real scholars. This isn't just nostalgia. It is a mirror between myth, history, and art. And that mirror begins not with monuments or crystals, but with something far smaller. An alphabet that may carry more than decoration. Disney's Atlantis hid one of its most surprising details, not in its grand battle scenes, but in its written script. The Atlantean language was crafted by linguist Mark Okrand, the same expert who created Klingon for Star Trek, and paired with a visual alphabet designed by John Emerson. The writing wasn't decorative filler. It was designed to run boustrophodon, reversing direction line by line, just like certain real ancient scripts. And one key letter, the Atlantean A, was drawn as a miniature map of the city itself. The cave as its frame, the silhouette of Atlantis inside, a single dot marking the heart. That level of precision means the alphabet operates like an archaeological puzzle. In fact, whole civilizations have resurfaced through the recovery of writing systems. Consider hieroglyphs. Once cracked, they reopened entire chapters of Egyptian history. Here, a fictional language channels the same process, hinting that words can be not just symbols, but keys to whole worlds. Okrand even began with an Indo-European word stock, giving the new grammar and vocabulary a trace of plausibility, as though you might stumble on a phrase and feel it half familiar. The visual influences woven into Atlantis deepen this illusion. The filmmakers avoided easy cliches of toppled Greek columns. Instead, they borrowed architectural motifs from Mayan structures, Cambodian temples, Indian stone carvings, and Tibetan fortresses. The result is a city that looks like it belongs to no one culture, yet feels grounded in several. That blend lets you experience Atlantis as something discovered, not invented. Real underwater sites like Pavlopetri or the sunken city of Thonis Herakleion show us how much can lie hidden for centuries, waiting to be mapped and read. The film mirrors this truth. Its alphabet makes the city itself a coded record. But if words and designs can hold memory, Atlantis also suggests that memory has power. And that power rests in the luminous core of the city. At the center of Disney's Atlantis lies the heart of Atlantis, a radiant crystal that does more than glow. In the film, it grants the Atlanteans a remarkable longevity and once powered their machines through the smaller fragments worn around their necks. To the people, it is sacred, yet its role is practical too. It sustains daily life like an unseen power grid running beneath the city. This vision was not created in a vacuum. The filmmakers drew from the writings of Edgar Cayce, who described a mother crystal at the core of Atlantis that provided energy, healing, and even the span of life itself. By weaving this lore directly into the plot, the film reimagines folklore as a tangible lifeline, a crystal humming with memory and utility. The story also bends toward caution. The heart begins as guardian and provider, but when Rourke and his crew try to weaponize it, the same force nearly destroys the entire civilization. That narrative arc reflects a long pattern in Atlantis myths. The belief that misuse of advanced knowledge leads to downfall, whether through floods, fire, or cataclysm. In the film, power becomes punishment when turned toward conquest. Even its sound carries meaning. The design team achieved the crystal's harmonic chime by sliding a wet finger around the rim of a champagne flute. That tiny detail gives the heart a texture you can almost feel. An audible reminder that something as simple as resonance has long been tied, in both legend and ritual, to ideas of hidden energy. Real submerged cities, like Pavlopetri with its intact town plan, or the sprawling remains of Thaoni's Herakleion, show how much structural knowledge can survive beneath the water. These ruins remind us that civilizations once built systems so advanced that we are still decoding them. In the film, the heart becomes a symbol of those lost systems of knowledge, made dazzling through myth. And when we step back, the question becomes larger. How much of this tale is pure invention, and how much echoes mysteries we continue to face today? Atlantis may appear as fantasy drawn in ink, yet its design is built from real fragments. Its language, shaped by Mark Okrand and John Emerson, with Bostraphodon script and symbols like the A as map, recalls the weight of forgotten alphabets. Its architecture borrows from global temples, yet still gestures to Plato's lost city. And its crystal heart, inspired by Cayce's vision of a mother stone, ties myth to the film's very plot. Together, these threads do not claim historical fact, but form a fabric of cultural memory and speculation. Which vision of Atlantis feels most convincing to you? Plato's parable, the Minoan link, or the image of a drowned land in the mid-Atlantic? Share your thoughts below. Watch the film again, and you may notice that Atlantis lingers less as an answer than as an illustrated question. A ship spotted drifting silently across the Atlantic. Sails ragged, provisions untouched. The crew's belongings neatly in place, but not a soul on board. If you enjoy vivid mysteries and deep visuals, like and subscribe. It helps us bring these stories to life. Today we will journey together into a case that still resists explanation. The Mary Celeste set sail from New York in early November 1872 with a small crew, a captain, his wife, and their 2-year-old daughter. The ship wasn't sinking. She wasn't plundered. She wasn't even short on food or water. Within minutes of boarding her, sailors knew they weren't looking at a wreck. They were staring at a mystery that remains unexplained, and what came into view as they drew closer only made that silence more unsettling. The crew of the Dei Gratia saw her first. A lone vessel drifting across calm water, her sails in tatters, lines hanging loose along her hull. From a distance, she gave the impression of neglect, but not of catastrophe. No cries, no clatter of work, no commands carried by the wind. The silence already felt unusual. and once alongside, they recognized the scene defied familiar patterns. Climbing aboard, they expected wreckage. There was some sails worn, rigging strained, and about 3.5 feet of water sloshing in the hold. One lifeboat was gone. Yet this was no sinking hulk. The Mary Celeste remained upright, her hull intact, her course aimless but steady. The ship floated with the strange poise of a vessel that had been deserted, not destroyed. That begged the immediate question: why would her people leave? She was far from land, and her deck carried no distress flag. An ocean-going ship still fit to sail is the last true barrier between survival and the open horizon. Stepping away from that safety left a contradiction hard to reconcile. The main hatch was found secure, but the fore and lazarette hatches lay open with their covers nearby, as though someone had hurried to check them. More telling still, a makeshift sounding rod was found on deck, and one of the pumps had been taken apart. Whoever had been on board had been measuring water levels and attempting to manage it. But the water, while concerning, was far from fatal. The decision to abandon under those conditions now seemed less a requirement and more a mystery. The ship's binnacle, once the neat housing for her compass, was shifted from its usual place, and its protective glass was broken. Such a detail spoke of disruption near the captain's station. Something disturbed, yet not destroyed. These changes suggested haste, fragments of action rather than chaos. Below deck, the pattern repeated. Food stores for 6 months sat in place, barrels sealed, pantries filled, water casks untouched. Clothing and bedding remained laid out in cabins. Trunks held garments folded neatly. Personal items like pipes and dishes were in order. It was as if the crew had stepped away, expecting to return at any moment, leaving their small world tidy behind them. Yet nothing spoke of violence. The timbers bore no scorch of fire. The decks showed no drop of blood or clash of weapons. No looting, no theft. Pirates had not come, nor had explosion or storm torn the vessel apart. Instead, the absence of destruction underscored a new problem. Fear had driven people from safety, but there was no evidence of what they feared. The cargo itself created another puzzle. Sealed casks of alcohol, volatile but intact, still lined the hold. No sign of leakage or ignition marked the barrels, yet they were always a potential hazard to men who sailed with them. If vapors had built unseen, the possibility of sudden disaster might have inspired panic, but the physical evidence refused to confirm it. Most conspicuous of all was the severed rope where the lifeboat should have hung. It had been cut, not carefully untied, suggesting urgency. And with the small boat missing, the traces left behind pointed clearly toward evacuation. But with the ship still seaworthy, their choice to leave raised a sharper riddle than the state of the ship itself. That's where the puzzle now turned. The lifeboat was gone, but so too were critical navigational tools and documents, items without which survival was nearly impossible. If there was indeed an evacuation, the traces it left behind raise even more difficult questions. Essential gear was taken, the captain's navigational instruments and many of his papers, but clothing and most personal effects remained in neatly ordered cabins. Such a pattern suggests not blind panic, but a choice shaped by urgency. It was as though they armed themselves with charts instead of food, compasses instead of coats. Direction became the priority, not provisions. The fear, whatever its source, seemed tied less to survival on the open sea than to the danger of staying on board. The ship's log offers the next clue. The last entry, dated November 25th, noted the Mary Celeste's position near the Azores. 9 days later, the ship was found adrift. When the rescuers searched, they found that the logbook was still in the mate's cabin, ending without alarm or warning. Captain Briggs's official correspondence, however, was missing, along with the sextant and other key tools. The contrast is marked. A neat, ordinary log left open on the desk, while the very equipment needed to chart a course had been removed. The lifeboat, then, seems to have been readied not as a desperate leap into chaos, but as a calculated extension of the voyage. Even the detail that the yawl's rope had been cut, not untied, points to haste, deliberate but fast. Weight presses heavier when you consider who was on board. This was not only a crew of professional sailors, but also Briggs's wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter. What kind of threat would it take for an experienced captain and father to carry his family into a small craft, far from shore, in uncertain seas? Abandoning a seaworthy vessel in open water is no casual act. To place wife and child in a lifeboat suggests that he believed something invisible aboard posed greater peril than the Atlantic itself. The neat cabins make clear they didn't scatter in panic. The decision reflects not frenzy, but what might be called orderly fear. The search of the cabins revealed another striking detail. Bunks were made. Chests remained shut. Crew belongings lay in place, undisturbed. There were no cuts or breaks in the wood, no signs of a fight. Mutiny would usually show itself in smashed locks or plundered stores. Instead, the only absences were official papers and instruments. Items that gave authority and direction. Whatever happened, everyone seemed to have left together, aligned in their decision, prepared for at least some further passage. One likely source of their alarm lay below deck. In the hold sat 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol. Fumes leaking from these barrels could build into a cloud heavy with risk. If the smell reached the crew, the fear of sudden fire might have driven them clear of the ship. Alcohol flames are difficult to see, capable of burning without smoke, and any spark could have meant disaster. The crew may have believed the only safety was distance, even if that meant climbing into the lifeboat. But when inspectors searched afterward, they found no scorch marks or evidence of fire. Later tests proved that fumes could ignite with little or no surface damage. Yet the fact stands. No flames touched the Mary Celeste. The ship remained intact, holding the supplies, the belongings, the structure of normal life. The threat may have been real only in the minds of those who fled. So the contradiction endures. The ship was abandoned carefully, with navigation in mind, yet also hurriedly, with fear pressing at their backs. The lifeboat was cut free as though every moment mattered. The cabins upstairs showed calm preparation. What drove that balance between panic and planning has never been pinned down, which leaves you and us with a vessel that floats steady and whole, yet stripped of its people. Not a ruin, not a wreck, but something else entirely. An enigma that remained adrift long after its crew was gone. And in that paradox, you begin to see why the Mary Celeste has never been forgotten. The unanswered trail left behind points to a conclusion as incomplete as the ship itself. The Mary Celeste was never a wreck in the usual sense. She floated steady, stocked and sound, yet emptied of the very people who gave her direction. What remained was a vessel balanced between order and alarm, like a locked room missing its final key. Investigators later noted the disassembled pump, the sounding rod left on deck, and the cargo of 1,701 barrels of alcohol. Many now see a fear of explosion or flooding as the likeliest cause, shaped in part by inaccurate readings of the ship's condition. One plausible reconstruction even shows that currents could have carried the vessel from her last logged position to her discovery point, suggesting she may have been deliberately set adrift after evacuation. A Gibraltar salvage court examined her for evidence of foul play, but found no convincing proof of murder. Stains once thought to be blood later tested negative. The likeliest explanations now remain natural ones: fumes, faulty equipment, or navigation errors. But no verdict has ever satisfied all who study her fate. At the heart of this mystery is a quiet truth. Fear, not force, seems to have driven her crew into the lifeboat, and yet no single answer has won consensus. And tell us in the comments which theory you find most convincing. Imagine a noise so strong it rippled across 5,000 kilometers of open ocean, picked up by hydrophones built to track quakes and distant rumbles. And yet, it wasn't a tectonic earthquake. Later evidence would tie it to ice quakes instead. At the time, it was an unknown, a pulse unlike anything ever recorded. NOAA researchers noted it was far louder than any known animal call. That single fact ignited wonder. Could something alive really be behind it? If you enjoy vivid mysteries and deep visuals, like and subscribe. It helps us bring these stories to life. The answer, as we'll see, unsettled both scientists and listeners. Because the noise rose like a living voice, yet no species could explain it. That question, the sound that should not exist, is where our story turns next. In 1997, the monitoring network suddenly picked up something researchers could not classify. A vast, low pulse rose slowly through the deep, caught by NOAA's Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory hydrophones. These instruments were tuned to track earthquakes, the thunder of shifting ice, and the voices of great whales as they traveled ocean basins. Most of what they recorded fit into neat categories, but this new arrival did not. It began faint, building in pitch like a living call. Over roughly 1 minute, the sound rose in frequency, tapering into a shape that looked eerily organic on spectrograms. To scientists reviewing the scroll of data, the curve had the profile of biology. Yet NOAA scientists noted one crucial detail. It was far louder than any recorded animal vocalization known at the time. Blue whales, the loudest creatures ever measured, can send their voices across hundreds of miles. But nothing cataloged came close to this amplitude. Submarine systems, though powerful, leave structured and mechanical marks. This was different, fluid, almost natural, and yet immense in scale. What made it even harder to dismiss was how far the sound carried. Hydrophones thousands of kilometers apart registered the same event at nearly the same moment. That meant the signal was strong enough to ripple through an ocean basin, louder by orders of magnitude than ordinary biological calls. To the public, the scale suggested something almost mythical, an unknown giant declaring itself in the abyss. The possibility gripped imaginations and spread fast. Speculation branched in many directions. Some wondered about hidden military machinery, vast engines in the South Pacific. Others preferred visions of undiscovered leviathans, creatures larger than any whale. The resemblance on spectrograms encouraged the idea, a voice that looked alive but came from nowhere known. Stories spilled into newspapers, late-night talk, even playful cultural references. The bloop became both a scientific puzzle and a public obsession. Understanding why it was so puzzling requires a pause on sheer volume. A blue whale's call, up close, already teeters at the edge of our hearing tolerance. Multiply that strength several times, and you enter the gulf between known biology and what the hydrophones had captured. For biologists used to scaling sound with body size, the implication was staggering. A creature large enough to create a call of that magnitude seemed almost beyond possibility. So why then did the signature echo patterns familiar to life? For years, scientists tested that question against data. Each sample was compared to cataloged whales, deep-diving fish, even rare squid recordings. None lined up. Machine records failed too, too regular, too metallic. The trace persisted, stubbornly organic in outline, but unmatched by any living source. It hovered outside categories and lingered on charts as unexplained. That endurance only amplified its hold. In scientific circles, the bloop was shown as an outlier, a reminder the ocean still whispered in unsolved codes. In the wider world, it kept the door open to legends and speculation. It was not proof of monsters, but it was proof of the unknown. And that, in the imagination of both scientists and the public, was powerful enough. Still, the absence of a biological match forced a turn toward other explanations. If not whales or machines, then perhaps something far older shaped the sound. A force less alive, but no less dramatic. So what could make the sea echo in the rhythm of a living voice? The story eventually shifted south, toward the icebound edges of Antarctica. What researchers learned there reframed the mystery entirely. The bloop, once imagined as a call from something alive, turned out to echo the roar of breaking ice. Beneath polar cliffs, enormous glaciers strain under their own weight. When stress builds beyond their limits, they fracture with sudden power, events known as ice quakes. These are not faint cracks. They are violent ruptures that send sound pulsing across the ocean floor. Hydrophones meant to hear tectonic movements suddenly register the thunder of splintering ice. At first, scientists doubted this connection. Ice quakes were acknowledged phenomena, but their reach was assumed to be short. The bloop had been recorded thousands of kilometers away. That scale seemed impossible. For years, the idea of an iceberg mimicking a biological voice felt less likely than the fantasy of an undiscovered animal. Yet new evidence overturned that skepticism. Between about 2005 and 2010, NOAA's Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory deployed hydrophones closer to Antarctica. Those instruments captured fresh ice quakes in the Southern Ocean. Their spectrograms rose and faded in exactly the same pattern as the bloop. The similarity was too precise to ignore. One case in particular gave the theory weight. In early 2008, a giant iceberg known as A53A disintegrated near South Georgia Island. Hydrophones recorded its collapse, and the resulting signal matched the bloop's distinctive rise almost note for note. With that recording, the puzzle sharpened. The source was not a colossal throat, but disintegrating ice. The way ice makes such a sound can be grasped through simple imagery. Inside a glacier, ancient air is sealed in pockets. When pressed and released, those pockets behave like bubbles bursting in boiling water. Tiny collapses magnified to continental scale. Add the grinding of bergs pushing against one another, and the releases surge outward as low-frequency waves. Seawater conducts those signals with extraordinary efficiency, carrying them across ocean basins. To put this in perspective, calving icebergs are like mountains sliding in slow motion into the sea. A single collapse unleashes energy vast enough to rival any animal call ever recorded. On a spectrogram, the shape mirrors what once seemed alive. But the voice is geological, not biological. Scientists now recognize these eruptions as part of Earth's soundscape. And they are not rare. As global temperatures rise, glaciers thin and fracture with growing frequency. Researchers point out that these ice quakes are becoming more common, reshaping what the ocean sounds like. What was once an occasional signal is turning into a chorus of shifting ice. Field surveys in the Bransfield Strait and Drake Passage confirmed the link firsthand. Teams recorded ice cliffs shattering and bergs grinding apart, then compared the traces to the archived mystery signal. The curve was almost identical. In one moment, the bloop was explained, an echo of Earth's frozen edges tearing loose. The search for monsters gave way to a clearer truth. The bloop was never alive. It was the sound of ice breaking, magnified by water until it roared like a beast. The monster vanished. What remained was ice, not flesh. The bloop was not evidence of a hidden sea monster. Research points to ice quakes as the source. NOAA's PMEL acoustic program later confirmed this by matching Antarctic icequake recordings to the original signal. What once appeared like the trace of a living call was revealed instead as Earth itself releasing pressure in ways few expected. That clarity strengthens the real takeaway. The unsettling part is that these powerful ice events are becoming more frequent as polar ice changes, reshaping the ocean's soundscape. Subscribe and turn on notifications to keep exploring mysteries like this with us.